The fire catches quickly, as it always does. The keys cling to her legs, then curl into black petals. Her eyes do not close. She does not scream. The crowd leans in not to pray, not to protest, but to watch. They came for justice. They stay for the heat, and what they will remember is the smell, the scent of burning hair. It is not the scent of guilt. It is not the scent of sin. It is the scent of a woman who made the wrong vow, who said yes to the wrong man, who did not ask for permission. And in Tudor England, that was enough. She was not a heretic, not a murderer. She bore no dagger, no doctrine. Her crime was simpler, older. She married without the king's consent. That was treason, not because of what she believed, but because of what she might produce. A child, a name, a claim, a future that did not pass through the hands of the crowns. So the law was clear. She must burn. The wind carries the smoke eastward toward the palace where the law was written and where no one is watching. The fire roars, not because it is hungry, but because it has been fed too well. And in that moment, as her body splits and cracks and folds inward like parchment in a flame, she is no longer a woman. She is precedent, a warning, symbol scorched into the soul of a kingdom. Because this law was strange, yes, but only in how honest it was. It did not pretend mercy, okay? It did not disguise itself with courtroom flourishes, okay? It said plainly, you may be born noble, you may be born rich, you may be born clever, but you are not born free, not if you are a woman. Not here. The crowd will remember the flames, the spectacle, the silence between the first scream and the last, but they will not remember her name, 'cause the law does not require memory, only obedience. What kind of world punishes love with fire? What kind of justice turns a bride into a cinder? One that fears women more than war. One that thinks the womb is a weapon. One that would rather reduce a girl to smoke than risk her giving birth to an idea. And so she burns, not for what she did, for what she might have done, and long after the fire is gone, long after her bones are crushed, beneath wet boots, the scent remains, the scent of burning hair, the scent of a strange law, the scent of a kingdom, Kana too terrified to let women choose. Before the ashes, before the law ignited her body, there was a girl, not a threat, not a rebel, just a girl with soft hands and careful posture, trained to curtsy at the right angle and speak only when spoken to. Her world was corseted in etiquette and perfumed with duty, and yet, somehow, she glowed at court. She was called graceful, well-positioned, suitable. They noticed the way her eyes lingered when a nobleman passed. They praised her needlework, her modesty, her ability to be pleasant without being memorable. She was perfect because she was invisible in all the right ways, but the wrong man saw her. He wasn't a king. He wasn't even favored. He was bold, handsome, dangerous in the way that only powerless men can be men who are too low to rule but too proud to kneel. And when he offered her his hand, she took it, not as a scandal, not as rebellion, but as a woman would take it with. Hope. They married in secret. No crown's permission, no court blessing, just fingers trembling in candlelight and vows whispered too quickly to be undone. And in that moment, she was not a subject, okay? She was a person. She loved. She chose. But in Tudor England, a woman's choice was a liability because the law was waiting, ancient, precise, and sharpened for moments like this. Under the Statute of Treasons, passed by Henry VIII himself, a woman of royal or noble blood who married without the king's consent was guilty of high treason. The same crime as plotting the king's death. The same punishment, burning. The law did not care that she had no army, no scheme, no poison ring. It cared only that her womb might produce a child the crown did not control, a potential rival, a hypothetical traitor, a future claimed too small to see, but dangerous enough to burn. What kind of law punishes a promise made in love? They called it sacred order, clothed in scripture and authority. 'Cause in a monarchy obsessed with bloodlines, a woman's body was not her own. It was a corridor through which power might accidentally pass into the wrong hands, and she had opened that door. Her husband was arrested, but not tortured. He was interrogated, but not destroyed, because men, even guilty ones, could be salvaged. But women were examples, and she, this girl who once blushed when the choir sang, is about to become a lesson written in fire. Still, there was no scandal in her eyes, no rebellion. Just the look of someone who thought she had done the right thing. Someone who would believe that choosing love would not lead to a funeral. She had no advisors, no faction, no one to shield her, only the law. And the law held the match. What rises quietly can be destroyed without notice. She had risen not in rebellion, but in joy. And for that, as fool, she would fall in flames. They found the record. One parchment, ink barely dried. The names were clear, the witnesses humble. No royal seal, no heraldic flourish, just a marriage, pure and private. A promise made without the king's blessing, and that was enough. The rumors spread quickly, not of infidelity, not of betrayal, but of disobedience. She had married as if she were free, as if her heart were hers to give, her body hers to bind. But the crown disagreed. For in the Tudor court, a noblewoman's hand was not hers to offer. It was a strategic tool, a diplomatic thread. Careless knot could unravel the kingdom. The king, furious and shamed, summoned the full weight of the law. She was arrested, not with screams, but with silence. One morning, the guards came. She did not run. She simply stood, as if already understanding that her vow had become a verdict in the records. Her name appears beneath the charge of high treason, but there is no list of weapons, no treasonous letter, no conspiracy. Only one phrase repeated like a curse: married without the sovereign's license. A man may survive such a thing. He may be fined, imprisoned, disgraced. But a woman carries the danger in her flesh, because if she were to bear a child, Soot could one day claim the throne. A threat not forged in rebellion, but in biology. And so her womb, once filled with hope, became evidence. She was tried not for what she had done, but for what she might do. The courtroom offered no mercy. There was no defense, no precedent, no escape. The law was ancient and unquestioned. Her fate was sealed, not by her actions, but by her existence outside permission. And yet, she did not plead. She stood tall, even as the sentence was passed. Death by burning, not for betrayal, not for murder, tease, but for love made without royal approval. When does marriage become a crime? When does a woman's vow carry more weight than a man's sword? Her husband, broken by interrogation, was spared. The flames. They said he was misled, seduced, perhaps even tricked. The blame, as always, belonged to the woman. Her passion, her hunger, her ambition. Even in love, they could not believe she had chosen without strategy. And that disbelief, that refusal to imagine a woman acting on feeling rather than manipulation, sealed her fate more tightly than any chain. Her cell was small, her letters few. She asked for no stay, no comfort. She simply wrote her sister one final note: tell them I meant no harm, only love. But in Tudor England, love without license was treason, and treason, when committed by a woman, could only end one way: in fire. The law did not bend. It never blinked. It simply opened its mouth and swallowed her whole. She was led through the halls of power, not as a traitor, tear, but as an inconvenience, something shameful to be cleaned up before it spread. Her trial was swift, her words barely noted. The judges wore velvet. The scribes sharpened their quills. Though her body trembled, her voice did not. She explained her marriage. She spoke of affection, of intention, of innocence. But innocence is not a defense when the crime is being a woman who chose. There were no jurors of her peers, no queen to speak on her behalf, no counselor bold enough to challenge the statute, because this law, this strange, cruel law, had no loopholes. It was designed not to prevent crime, but to preserve control, to remind every noblewoman, your heart is not your own. Your vow is not yours to give. Your body is a battleground for dynasties, and every thread of your fate is laced through the king's fist. She stood alone beneath the weight of this logic, and the court, dressed in robes that masked rot, pronounced her death in polite terms. They said she was to be executed by flame. Okay? They used no poetry, no God, just bureaucracy. Okay? The sentence read like a ledger. Name, charge, date, death. And yet, she did not collapse. She thanked them for the clarity of the verdict. Because in that moment, clarity was the only thing they had not already taken from her. As word spread, the palace buzzed with discomfort. Servants whispered behind their hands, "She only married. He lives, but she burns." La, is that the law? Okay, even they did not know, because the truth was hidden inside a law so old, so cruel, and so specific that few remembered its purpose. But it had always been there like dry wood waiting for a match. Statute of Treasons, 1534, signed by Henry VIII, expanded by fear, enforced by silence. The flames were not justice. They were policy. How does a woman argue with a law that was written before she was born by men who feared what she might one day become? No confession could save her, no appeal, no favor. And so she waited in the tower, not for mercy, but for the weather to clear, for dry wood to be found, for the executioner to be chosen. The law had spoken, and soon, so would the fire. They brought her out before dawn, not to spare her shame, but to spare the crowd the heat of midday. The wood was stacked, high dry, sharp, bitter-scented. A priest walked beside her, mumbling verses, not for her soul, but for the appearance of grace. She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on the rising smoke, curling already from the corners of the pyre, like fingers beckoning her home. Her dress was plain, her hands tied, her mouth dry. The crowd had gathered, as they always did, like flies to blood some out of hunger for justice, others for the thrill of spectacle. A few children laughed, a dog barked. Somewhere, a woman whispered a prayer beneath her breath. They tied her to the stake with ropes rougher than her skin. She didn't resist, not because she accepted it, but because she had learned resistance only made them more certain you deserved the pain. The executioner stepped back. The torch was lit. The flames licked the base of the pyre first, then climbed eager, hot, cracking through air that moments ago had felt holy. Her skirts caught. The smoke began to rise, and with it came the sound no one forgets, even if they pretend they do. The sound of skin blistering, the sound of a body convulsing as it chooses between breathing smoke or swallowing fire. The smell crid, thick, undeniable, love-burning hair. She cried out once, not a scream, a breath torn inside, out, then silence. Her body writhed, curved backward, collapsed forward. Her hair vanished first, her face next. But the flame wanted more. The flames did not care that she had only loved. They only knew. She had not asked, and so they fed. Those in the front row wept not for her. But for the way the fire reminded them of their kitchens, their hearts, the way meat crackles on iron pans, they turned away. But they did not leave. This was not just a punishment. It was education. The queen's chambermaids were made to attend. Young ladies from noble houses were summoned to witness. Because nothing deters rebellion like the sound of a woman's bones blackening in public. And through it all, she made no second sound. Her throat scorched. Her lungs collapsed. Her eyes burned from their sockets before her knees gave way. Still, the ropes held her upright, as if her body, even in agony, must remain obedient. What is a woman's worth, once stripped of breath and name? The law dashed nothing to the crowd only a moment into the fire fuel. They let the flames die slowly, not to show mercy, but to make sure. And when only ash remained ash in the faint shape of something once living yet, the soldiers stepped forward and scattered her remains. No relics, no shrine, no place to mourn, only soot carried by the wind toward the court that condemned her, and the king who never spoke her name again. And long after the smoke cleared, one thing lingered, not her story, just the smell, the scent of burning hair, the scent of silence, sanctioned by law, the scent of a body that tried to choose, paid the price in fire. The fire is nearly gone now. The embers crackle beneath the charred wood, like the last defiant cough of a soul, too stubborn to leave quietly. The ropes that held her have vanished. The body, once tied upright in a mockery of dignity, is a dark outline in the ash folded in on itself, curled like a question the law refused to answer. The crowd, too, is quiet. Not from grief, from awe, from the heavy, choking stillness that follows a death too intimate to justify. This wasn't a beheading, quick, clean, theatrical. This was slower, more primitive, more honest. One man coughs, another turns away. A woman retches into her handkerchief. But most simply watch, eyes glazed, mouths slack. Something in them, disturbed but unnamed, because she did not speak. She had been given the chance one final speech, a tradition, a performance. She could have begged. She could have blessed the king. She could have pleaded for other women to obey. But she said nothing. She looked toward the horizon, the early sky still soaked in pre-dawn blue. She took a breath, and she exhaled, and that was all. The silence that followed was not peace. It was refusal. A final rejection of the story they wanted her to tell. She would not ask forgiveness. She would not sanctify her murder. She would not cry for a God used as a weapon against her. She died between two breaths, one taken in defiance, one never released. The executioner doused the edges of the pyre not to save, but to end. There was nothing left to burn. Nothing left to punish. The law had fit well, and now it rested, satisfied, until the next name was summoned. The ashes were scraped up, dumped into a ditch, not a grave, not even a hole. It's just a shallow smear of earth at the edge of the yard. Her name was never engraved, never spoken in court again, but the smoke rose higher than the palace towers, higher than the steeples that claimed to know heaven. And for a moment, just a moment, it looked like a veil. A wedding veil lifted toward something better than this world ever gave her. Was this death or denial? Because in killing her, they erased nothing. They only revealed the truth that when a woman breathes without permission, the state holds its breath and then sets her on fire. And so the scene ends, not with a cry, not with a cheer, but with a hush, thought a woman vanishing into smoke, a law satisfied by silence, and a kingdom pretending it was justice. The flames died, the crowd scattered, the ash cooled, but the law, the strange, silent law, that sentenced her dash remained. No reform followed. No debates stirred the halls of Parliament. No voice rose to ask, why did she die? Because in Tudor, England, her death was not seen as tragedy. It was compliance, a line checked, a danger extinguished, a future rewritten with fire. Her name was erased from court records, her marriage annulled posthumously. It's as if love itself could be retroactively outlawed. Her family was disgraced, their titles suspended, their grief forbidden, and a man she married the man who stood beside her once in candlelight was spared the flames. Not forgiven, just spared. Because men could sin without smoke, for women, the law lingered. It was not repealed. It was not softened. It was buried quietly in the folds of Tudor legislation, like a knife hidden in a book. It waited, it watched, and it was ready to be used again. And it was. Other women were tried, burned, buried, without stone or psalm. Some for marriages, some for words, some for nothing at all, but always under the same logic that a woman who chooses without approval is dangerous, that a woman's love, when misdirected, becomes treason, that to protect the kingdom, her body must be burned before her story can spread. And so the law lived on, in fear, in whispers. In the silence that follows every unjust death, her friends remembered her not by name, but by color. The gray of her gown, the red of the flames, the white of the smoke that rose when she stopped moving. They passed stories in secret of how she stood tall, how she did not scream, of how the sky that day did not blink. But the officials, they remembered nothing. They had done their duty. They had enforced the statute. They had preserved the crown. And yet, the air near the scaffold never smelled right again. It lingered, not like perfume, not like incense, but like guilt, a scent without a name, drifting through chambers and corridors long after her voice had been turned to ash. Because laws, when written in fear, never disappear. They sink into the ground. They wait for the next woman to walk by without asking. There was no monument for her, no statue, no shrine, only the echo of her name in documents meant to be forgotten. And yet, her legacy endures not in marble, but in metaphor, not in celebration, but in fear. Because her death was never just a punishment. It was a message to every woman who dared to want, who dared to speak, who dared to love someone the crown did not approve of. It was not her body that threatened the orderette, was her will, her choice, her womb. In Tudor England, a woman's body was not hers. It was a vessel, a potential lineage, a political liability. And if that body dared to become more than a tulip, it dared to speak, to defy, to desire, then it became a danger, and dangers were burned. Her story is not isolated. It is an omen, a pattern repeated in every century. Women accused of sorcery, for reading, of heresy, for healing, of treason, for refusing. The pyre did not die with her. It moved into courthouses, into prisons, into headlines. What is the cost of a woman's freedom when fire is the price of disobedience? The law that took her did not die. Transformed. Today, it wears new clothes. Does not carry a torch. It carries paperwork, diagnosis, dismissal, discredit, but it still smells the same, like smoke, like fear, like the end of a voice the world did not want to hear. She was not a queen, not a saint. She was a wife, a woman, a body deemed unworthy of forgiveness. But her silence, as she burned, became louder than any sermon. Her ashes left fingerprints on history's throat. Because when a woman is punished for love, it is never really about love. It is about power. It is about control. It is about keeping the fire lit, not to warm the world. but to remind it who holds the match. And still, her image returns. In paintings, in books, in the uneasy glances of men who rule, knowing the world is watching now, knowing the pyres of the past have become mirrors, because every law that burns a woman is remembered not by its authors, but by its ghosts. It was not called the burning law. It had no fire in its name. It whispered through Parliament under the guise of order, morality, preservation. Statute, tucked between pages on inheritance and treason, quietly expanded to include not just the traitor's estate, but the traitors of custom. It said, women who married without royal consent could be deemed a threat. It said, such unions might disrupt alliances, jeopardize dynasties, challenge the king's will. It did not say, burn them, but that's what it meant, because under Henry VIII, law became more than parchment. It became pretext, and fear was its ink. This was a time when the crown and church had begun to divide. Yet both agreed on one thing: women must not move without permission. The law was flexible for men. They could sin, then repent. They could stray, then be summoned. But when accused were finished, the strange law that doomed them wasn't just about whom they loved. It was about whom they didn't wait for. They didn't wait for a father's blessing, or a priest's approval, or a king's cold nod from across the throne room. Lee chose, and choice in a woman was rebellion, so the law didn't have to say execution. It didn't need to mention flames. It only needed to offer a path, And the judges, the clergy, the courtiers, they followed it, step by step, justifying each cruelty by pointing backward at the letter of the law. What do we call a rule that kills in silence? What is the difference between a law and a knife if both end with a woman's body and the dirt? The answer is nothing, only that a knife gleams in the sun. A law hides in shadows, and while the blade may be stained with blood, the law remains clean, on paper at least. They stood in the crowd, skirts brushing mud, hands clasped tightly, lips unmoving. Mothers, daughters, ladies, 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 waiting, caught, listening, learning, not just what happened to her, but what could happen to them. They did not scream when the fire lit. They did not run forward. They did not tear their veils or shout at the crown, because silence in that moment was not indifference. It was survival. Every flicker of flame was a warning. Every crack of timber a lesson. The law had shown its face, one carved with mail, power cloaked in religious virtue, and teeth sharpened on fear. And the message was simple: if you step outside the lines, you burn. Many of the women in that crowd had known her, dined with her, gossiped with her. They had shared prayers, laughter, and secrets, but they also knew their place. In Tudor England, loyalty to a friend could cost more than reputation. It could cost your breath. And so, they stayed quiet. They told themselves she had brought it on herself, that she had known better, that love without permission was not love at all but pride, or witchcraft, or something darker, because it is easier to grieve a woman when you blame her first. In the weeks that followed, these same women folded gowns, arranged marriages, bowed before the same king who had signed her death. They blessed children, lit candles, went to mass, but they never said her name. And that, too, was part of the execution. A woman's true death begins when even her friends forget how she lived. We remember the fire. We remember the law. But we forget the watching women, because history prefers martyrs and monsters, never the silent middle. Yet they were there. And perhaps, in their silence, we see something more chilling than the flames, the quiet of self-preservation, the compromise of conscience, the inheritance of fear, because sometimes the fire burns loudest in those who walk away untouched, but carry the heat in their bones for the rest of their lives. Tudor England rose, not from marble, but from embers, not from sermons, but from screams. For every cathedral raised to glory, a woman's body had burned in silence. For every treaty signed with quill and wax, there was a pyre behind it smoking, just out of view. And for every coronation song that rang through stone halls, the soot of execution still clung to the beams above. This was not a kingdom of peace. It was a kingdom of fear perfected into policy. It was not law that ruled England. It was the threat of law. And beneath the velvet robes, behind the divine right, the bloodline, the order, there lay the ash of women who had become inconvenient. She was not the first. She was not the last. But she was the most forgotten, because her death was too bureaucratic to become legend, too ordinary to become a cautionary tale, female to become history. And so her story faded, not erased, but diluted, written into margins, whispered in nunnery halls, folded into the caution taught to daughters for generations after. The kingdom moved on. It always does. New queens arrived. New enemies were named. The bonfires became less frequent, but the lesson remained encoded in silence, because even as the executions stopped, the fear did not. And no matter how many statues were erected, no matter how many crowns passed hands, the ground beneath English soil stayed warm with memory. The ash was still there. Tread on it, and it will not rise, not in smoke, but in questions. How many laws were written just to break one woman? How many kings feared love more than rebellion? How many empires begin with a scream and end in forgetting what caused it? A kingdom built on ashes must one day reckon with the fire that still lives beneath its stones. They called it justice. They called it divine law. They called it the price of order, of stability, of royal command. But it was a fire, and it has not gone out. The woman they burned is long gone, her name nearly erased, her breath devoured by smoke, her bones dust beneath forgotten stones. Yet the flame they lit still dances in parliaments, in pulpits, in headlines, not in the open, no, but quietly, disguised, controlled. We see it when a woman is punished for choosing wrong, when a girl is silenced for speaking out, when rules are written not to protect but to contain, when disobedience is dressed up as disorder. That fire never needed wood, needed only fear. It fed on obedience, on apology, on the careful trimming of one's voice to survive a man's world. It flickers every time someone asks, but what was she wearing? Or why didn't she just listen? It burns in the laws that still tell women where to go, what to do, who to marry, when to speak. It burns in the silence of those who benefit from it, and in the shaming of those who resist it. And perhaps that is the cruelest irony. They lit her to destroy her, but in doing so, they made her eternal, because every injustice echoes. And every time a woman resists, loves without permission, refuses to shrink, or steps forward when told to stay behind, her shadow rises, not as smoke, but as witness, as reminder that fire still burns, not to punish, but to warn. But we are not as afraid of it as we once were, because the world remembers now. We remember that woman, the strange law that took her. We remember how quickly law can become violence, how easily obedience can become complicity, how slowly justice moves unless dragged, screaming, into the light. She has no grave with flowers, only a flame that keeps asking, what are we still willing to burn to keep the world the same? And the wind answers, everything, unless someone says, no more.